In a word? The fifth and final season of Star Trek Discovery is complete. The series that brought Star Trek back to television, well, streaming, close enough, after 12 years has ended its run, and I will have more to say about the series as a whole and what I think about its contribution and legacy to the Star Trek franchise in another video. For right now, let's focus on this last season and the 10 episodes that comprise it. Good? Bad? If bad, at least better than Star Trek Picard? I mean, Season 5, Episode 1, Red Directive. This seems like a good place to start, being the season premiere and all. Captain Burnham and the crew of the Discovery are given a Red Directive from Starfleet, which is a super-duper secret mission that you're just supposed to do without asking any nosy questions. The mission involves visiting a recently discovered 800-year-old Romulan ship and taking custody of a particular item from it. After a bunch of chasing and fighting, the Disco crew loses the item, which turns out to be the journal of a 24th century Romulan scientist, to a couple of smugglers, Maul and Locke. Fortunately, they are able to obtain most of the contents of the journal by downloading the memory of a dead android who read the journal right before Maul and Locke killed him. Through the journal, plus some info from mysterious Federation agent Kovich, Burnham learns that the Romulan scientist discovered the technology used by an ancient race called the progenitors to create all other forms of sentient life in the galaxy. The journal pointed the way to a planet where the next clue to finding the progenitors' technology is waiting to be found. Not a terrible episode, but not the best start to the season either. Lots of table setting, introducing the villains, Maul and Locke, setting up the MacGuffin for the season. The MacGuffin is an Easter egg from Star Trek The Next Generation, tying in with the 7th season TNG episode The Chase, which introduced the progenitors. Captain Picard is name-dropped, making your show's final season a prolonged sequel to a so-so episode of another show that went off the air 30 years ago is not a great idea, if you ask me. But it's only episode 1. Let's give it a chance. And hey, the episode also introduces Captain Rayner, a new character played by Callum Keith Rennie, a gruff, no-time-for-bullshit officer who winds up being one of the highlights of the season. So that's good. Episode 2, Under the Twin Moons. Burnham and Saru beam down to an uninhabited planet and find themselves fighting off a swarm of deadly automated drones in order to find the clue to the progenitors' technology. It's Saru's last mission as first officer of Discovery. He's accepted a new assignment as an ambassador. And also he's getting married to his girlfriend, Trina, the president of Volculus. I know they call it Nivar in the show. I call it Volculus, because that name is simultaneously better and worse than Nivar, okay? Anyway, with some help from Tilly and Adira on Discovery, and Rayner hollow-Skyping in to lend a hand as well, Burnham and Saru find the clue, and when they return to Discovery and combine it with the first clue, they realize that they're assembling a map that will lead them to the progenitors' technology. Oh, how fun! The action sequence with Burnham and Saru on the planet is excellent, as is the character stuff between Burnham and Saru before and after. Saru leaving Discovery, and specifically leaving Burnham after all they've been through, lands as a meaningful development. Another meaningful development, Saru's replacement as first officer is Rayner, who was facing a forced retirement from Starfleet following questionable actions in pursuit of Maul and Locke in the previous episode. Burnham believes Rayner deserves another chance and offers him a spot on Discovery, which he accepts. Oh, and Book discovers that Maul is the daughter of his old mentor. That sounds like it's important, but it winds up not mattering at all. Episode 3, Janal. Discovery visits the planet Trill, where the next clue is hidden. The location of the clue is in the memories of a joined Trill symbiont, but in order to access those memories, the symbiont must undergo a Jantara ritual, temporarily transferring the consciousness of a previous host to a new body. The previous host, Janal, inhabits the body of Dr. Culber and leads Burnham and Book to the clue after they prove themselves worthy by showing respect to some dangerous animals nesting near where the clue is apparently located. You've proven that you will try to connect with a life form different from yourselves, rather than just shooting first, Janal tells them, so here's your next piece of the treasure map. Meanwhile, Rayner has been getting to know the crew of Discovery by bringing them in one at a time for 30-second conversations. Tilly disapproves, telling Rayner that the crew needs to be able to believe that he cares about them, but Rayner tells her that he prefers to keep a professional distance from his subordinates. Tilly's like, I still think you should be their friend, though. I like Rayner, but I wasn't a fan of his subplot here. One of the criticisms of the writing of Discovery over the years has been that the characters communicate in therapy speak, and while I don't always think that's fair, it definitely comes through really strongly in the early scene between Rayner and Burnham and in Rayner's interactions with Tilly. On the other hand, the stuff on Trill with Burnham, Book, and Culber as Janal is pretty good. The bit with the animals and Burnham and Book having to prove themselves by behaving compassionately rather than exerting force to get what they want is predictable, but it's executed well and it's quintessential Star Trek. Also, Wilson Cruz is obviously having a ball playing Janal, which is infectious, and I'm nearly always a sucker for series regulars getting to play someone other than their main character. This episode isn't perfect, but it's one of my favorites from this season. Episode 4, Face the Strange. Oh, and this one might be my favorite from the season. Not coincidentally, it's also the closest thing to a standalone episode this year. While on the way to find the next clue, Discovery is sabotaged by a weapon secretly planted on Adira by Maul while everyone was on Trill in the last episode. The weapon is a time bug, and when it activates, it traps the ship in a cycle of constant time travel, jumping randomly from past to future. Everyone else on the ship is unaware of what's happening, but Burnham and Rayner were in the middle of beaming somewhere when the bug activated, which somehow allows them to realize their predicament. They soon join forces with Stamets, who is also aware of what's happening thanks to the tardigrade DNA he injected himself with back in Season 1, which allows him to perceive events outside linear time. Between the three of them, they're finally able to locate and disable the time bug, but not before briefly visiting a bleak future where the Breen have destroyed Starfleet and the Federation. Once they get back to the present, they visit the coordinates they found on Trill where the next clue is supposed to be, but they find nothing. Maul and Locke have apparently been here too, but they're gone now, and their trail seems to just vanish after a certain point. The episode ends with Burnham encouraging the crew to get to work figuring out where that next clue is. Not the greatest ending, and some of the time travel stuff starts to have a bit of a navel-gazing quality to it as Burnham, Rayner, and Stamets visit past eras of the show and encounter characters like Ariam who haven't been around for a while. There's also a couple of encounters between Burnham and her past self, which aren't as fun or as interesting as the creators were clearly trying to make them, but the resolution ultimately hinges on one of the recurring themes of the season, the importance of connection between people. Rayner learns the importance of that kind of connection, and it helps to save the day, adding a bit more shading to Rayner's character and paying off what he and Tilly were talking about at the end of the previous episode. Again, not a great episode. Unfortunately, Season 5 has no great episodes, but a solid one, with an inventive twist on a time loop premise that Star Trek has done countless times before, that Discovery itself has done before, in fact, some good character work, and at least an attempt to establish some concrete stakes for the season with the glimpse of the future where the Breen have destroyed Starfleet. Like I said, probably my favorite episode of the season. Episode 5, Mirrors. Burnham and Book travel inside a wormhole in search of Maul and Locke and the next progenitor's clue, and everyone meets up on the TOS-era Starship Enterprise from the Mirror Universe, which is here for some reason. While Burnham and Book fight with Maul and Locke over possession of the next clue, we also get flashbacks to how Maul and Locke met and fell in love. Maul was a courier who occasionally had business with the Breen, and Locke is a member of the Breen royal family who was being punished by being forced to work in the shuttle bay of his ship. Maul wants to go work for the Emerald Chain to earn money so she can move to a planet in the Gamma Quadrant. Locke runs afoul of his uncle, a Breen bigshot who discovers Locke and Maul together. Locke's uncle orders him to kill Maul, but Locke kills his fellow Breen instead, though he only wounds his uncle before escaping with Maul. Because he betrayed his people, Locke has been marked with an Eriga, which is a silly made-up word for an irrevocable bounty on his head, meaning that for the rest of his life he will be hunted by the other Breen. But Locke and Maul hope that if they are able to locate the progenitor's technology, they will be able to sell it to the Breen in exchange for lifting the bounty. Anyway, aboard the Mirror Universe Enterprise, eventually Locke is seriously injured while fighting with Burnham and Book, and he and Maul make their escape. Burnham ends up in possession of the next clue, a vial of liquid which, once analyzed, will hopefully yield the location of another clue. Not a great episode. I appreciate the effort being made to develop Maul and Locke into compelling, complex villains. Not evil, just desperate people trying to get themselves out of a bad situation, and apparently willing to risk the lives of billions of people in order to do it. So actually maybe a little evil. There's a lot of stuff in this episode that I suppose the creators thought would be a big deal to a certain kind of Star Trek nerd. The ISS Enterprise! The Breen! Hey, it turns out Locke is a Breen, and that's what they look like without their helmets. And also, they have another face that's all kind of shimmery and liquidy, and they can show people that face when they want to instead of their solid face. This is an attribute of the Breen for some reason. I'm the wrong kind of Star Trek nerd for this stuff. I don't give a shit what the Breen look like or how many faces they have. And though I love the Strange New Worlds version of the Enterprise, I'm not impressed by simply seeing a few of its sets show up on Discovery to represent the Mirror Universe Enterprise. None of this means anything apart from a compelling story. And unfortunately, Mirrors doesn't have that. Maybe not the worst episode of the season, but definitely the most forgettable, despite all the Trekkie bells and whistles they tacked on. Episode 6, Whistle Speak. Speaking of whistles, the crew's analysis of the liquid vial recovered in the previous episode leads, after some investigation, to a planet suffering from a drought, where the next clue is thought to be concealed. The people living on this planet are pre-warp, so Burnham and Tilly beam down disguised as natives and find themselves running a ritualistic marathon, which they hope will lead them to the clue. Once again, a solid episode, and another largely standalone episode as well. Go figure. There's a late episode twist regarding the nature of the marathon that isn't that big of a surprise in hindsight, but still works very well. There are several problems that demand teamwork to solve, which pulls in the supporting cast in meaningful ways, and there are some very nice character beats. I particularly liked Rayner showing confidence in Adira during their first posting to the bridge on Discovery, and Burnham's climactic appeal to Ovaz, one of the inhabitants of the planet, who is forced to choose between his commitment to ritual and the life of his child. A sturdy, nicely executed plot, multiple character beats that are moving and well acted, and a message about the importance of having faith, but also being open to allowing your faith to evolve with the times. This is another of the best showings of the season. Episode 7, Eriga. Oh, I love when they use one of their own goofy made-up words for the title of an episode. So, Maul and Locke are captured. Locke is still in a real bad way due to his injury a couple of episodes ago, which forced them to put out a distress call, which was heard by a Starfleet vessel. And before you know it, there they are in Discovery's sickbay, Locke on a bed, Maul close at his side, guards standing by at the ready. While Dr. Culber treats Locke, Admiral Vance informs Captain Burnham of a complication. The Breen have learned that Locke and Maul are in Starfleet custody, and they're on their way to claim them and cross off that bounty. Having seen a possible future where the Breen destroy Starfleet and worried this Locke and Maul business could start a war, Burnham urges Vance to negotiate with the Breen delegation when they arrive to find a peaceful solution. Vance is worried about the Breen finding out about the existence of the progenitor's technology, but he agrees with Burnham, and when the Breen show up, Trina, temporarily in charge while the Federation president is safely elsewhere, Vance, Burnham, and Rayner attempt to persuade the Breen to not be dicks about this. It doesn't go super well. Tarina offers a supply of dilithium to the Breen leader, Locke's Uncle Rune, in exchange for lifting the bounty on Locke and Maul, but Rune doesn't bite. He says he's perfectly willing to just kill them all. He doesn't give a shit. However, our heroes happen to know that Rune is bluffing, at least up to a point. He might be willing to kill a whole bunch of people, but he's not willing to risk the life of Locke because, see, there's a power struggle in the Breen government, and Locke carries royal blood, so having Locke on his side will bolster Rune's claim to the Breen. Long story short, Locke dies from his injuries. Maul reveals that she and Locke are actually married. Rune demands custody of Maul and Locke's corpse, and after some deliberation and strong objections from Book, Tarina decides to let the Breen take Maul and Locke because if they refuse, it might start a war, and the Breen are powerful and super scary. Meanwhile, Tilly and Adira have been following up on the last clue to the progenitor's technology they found, and with some help from good old Jet Reno, they figure out that the next clue is to be found on a galactic archive, a space library that is currently located in the Badlands. So, that's where they're going next. This one devotes a lot of time to the parts of the season I care the least about, so it's a miss for me. I appreciate what they're trying to do with Maul and Locke, and by the way, the performances by Eve Harlow as Maul and Elias Tufexis as Locke are very good. I just want to make that clear. But it's just not working. And I really couldn't give less of a shit about the treasure hunt at this point. I will say the big negotiation scene between Tarina, Vance, Burnham, and Rayner and the Breen is very well done. There are points where the Breen do come across as legitimately scary and effective villains, so much so that I find myself asking why the writers didn't just make them the primary villains and leave Maul and Locke out altogether. On the other hand, I give even less of a shit about all the Breen Game of Thrones bullshit than I do about the progenitor's treasure hunt, so it's also revealed in this episode that Rayner has some personal history with the Breen, as they once occupied his home planet and apparently weren't very nice about it. It's always nice to see Tig Notaro as Jet Reno, though her role in the plot feels like something that could have been one line, which they artificially stretched out to cover multiple scenes. Tilly and Adira are looking for an old book, and it takes Reno, 2 scenes of them following her around on the ship to suggest that maybe they check the library? Episode 8, Labyrinths. Discovery goes to the library. Burnham goes to the library, specifically accompanied by Book, because the library's collection includes an item from Quajon, Book's home planet, which was destroyed in Season 4. Burnham finds the book they've been looking for, and it contains a telepathic interface that transports Burnham's consciousness into a virtual recreation of the library, where she, along with a guide who takes a form identical to Book, must search out, say it with me, the next clue. While Burnham is in her virtual reality book coma, Book the person, lots of books in this episode set in a library, aren't there? Book the person views the item from Quajon in the collection. It turns out it's a cutting from his planet's world root, the massive root system that encompassed all of Quajon and symbolized the unity of all life on that planet. Book is surprised and deeply moved and allowed to take the world root cutting with him. Things get tense when the Breen show up looking for that clue. The library is officially neutral in all conflicts, but Rune doesn't give a shit and attacks the library and sends soldiers aboard to find the clue. Rayner and Culber beam over and they try to wake Burnham up from her telepathic nap, while the rest of the crew aboard Discovery, temporarily commanded by Lieutenant Commander Reese, do their best to keep the Breen at bay. Burnham eventually gains access to the next clue by confessing her fears and insecurities to the guide, which was necessary to show that she is an honest and thoughtful person who can be trusted with the power of the progenitor's technology. The guide gives Burnham one final hint, which she will need when she finds the progenitor's technology, and she wakes up, grabs the last clue from the spot in the library where the guide told her it would be, and Discovery saves the library from the Breen by giving the final clue to Rune, but not before making a copy of the information it contains and completing the map to the location of the progenitor's technology. Burnham orders Discovery to jump away using its spore drive while simultaneously triggering explosions to fool the Breen into thinking Discovery was destroyed. It works, because Breen are mean but not smart, I guess. Also, Maul kills Rune and takes over as leader of the Breen, I guess? And the other Breen, established as a fanatically xenophobic and supremacist culture, just go along with it because she was married to Locke? I don't buy it for a second. I don't care. But then again, I didn't care about the Maul and Locke stuff before, so at least we're no worse off. I liked some of the library stuff in this one. The scene where Book sees the world root cutting is lovely. I felt for Book in that moment. That combination of surprise, happiness, and reawakened grief that he experiences. I also liked the guide who looked like Book, the Book-alike, in Burnham's telepathic vision. But that vision quest also brought home to me how little I actually know the character of Michael Burnham after 5 years. The character of Burnham gets a lot of undeserved hate from certain corners of the fan base, and I think we know what some of that is really about. I've never disliked her, quite the opposite. I've always wanted to like her, but I've also always felt as though I'm being kept at a distance from her. Sonequa Martin Green's performance is always top-notch, so it's not that. It's been something about the writing of the character and her big speech to Book-alike near the end of this one, where she spills her guts about being driven by fear and worrying that she's not good enough, finally crystallized the problem for me. I don't know her. When she's confessing all these feelings and fears, it reads as inauthentic to me, not because I don't think what she's saying is true, but because I don't know whether it's true or not, because I don't know her. I don't know who she is. I'm not sure if the writers know who she is. If they do, they haven't done a very good job showing who she is over the last 5 seasons. In contrast to that, there's Lieutenant Commander Reese getting his big moment. I like that a lot, but it also brought out one of the most enduring and frustrating flaws of the series, the poor characterization of the Discovery Bridge crew. Reese has been there all along. We've occasionally got little snippets of backstory or trivia about his character, but seeing him take command of the ship and actually interact with the rest of the crew and make important decisions was the first time, and as it turns out, the last time, that I ever felt like I kinda knew who he was. There's a reason show don't tell is a rule in the writing craft. If you show me who a character is, you can accomplish more in one scene than you could with 10 seasons worth of telling me who they are. Exposition ain't characterization. Anyway, nice to meet you, Reese. Episode 9, Lagrange Point. Damaged after the simultaneous spore jump and explosion trick from the last episode, Discovery is stranded and rushing to make repairs so our heroes can reach the location of the progenitor's technology before the Breen arrive. That location is the Lagrange Point, between 2 black holes, an area of gravitational stability where the vessel containing the progenitor's technology has been waiting for 800 years. Before Discovery can get at it, the Breen show up and yoink the MacGuffin away with a tractor beam. Well, that's not ideal. So, Burnham and Book beam over to the Breen ship disguised as Breen and eventually find their way to the cargo bay where the vessel containing the technology is being studied by Breen scientists. It turns out that inside the vessel is some kind of portal. A couple of Breen go through and don't come back. Then Maul goes through, soon followed by Michael. Meanwhile, on Discovery, Rayner, who's been weird about not wanting to sit in the captain's chair this whole time, takes command and swears to get the progenitor's technology and save Burnham, and the episode ends with him taking the captain's chair for the first time. Another mostly forgettable episode that's only here to kill time until the finale. The most memorable parts for me are 2 of the most laughable moments. First, when the Breen show up and grab the progenitor's technology, which they're able to do because while Discovery got there first, for some reason, Burnham and the rest of the crew decide to just stand there and gawk at it for a few minutes, instead of immediately zapping a tractor beam onto the thing. And second, when Burnham chooses to tell Book that she still has feelings for him and isn't happy with their breakup, while they're in disguise sneaking around the Breen ship. They couldn't have placed this scene a little earlier? When Burnham and Book are getting ready to beam over to the Breen ship, maybe? That's another common complaint from haters of this show, that the characters talk about their feelings too much. Again, I don't think that's an entirely fair criticism, but for scenes like this it is. Why is she talking about this now? Episode 10, Life Itself. And finally, the finale. While Discovery, commanded by Rayner, tries to fight off the Breen and capture the Progenitor's portal, which has been freed from the vessel that contained it and thrown out of the Breen ship, Burnham and Maul find themselves in an endless liminal space on the other side of the portal and form an uneasy alliance to find and use the Progenitor's technology. Burnham solves the final puzzle in order to operate the technology using the clue Book-alike gave her in the library and meets one of the Progenitors, who explains that they, the Progenitors, did not actually invent this life-creating technology, they merely discovered it. Sadly, while it can create new life, it cannot bring back the dead, which spoils Maul's plan to use it to bring Locke back from the dead. Ultimately, Burnham decides that the technology is too dangerous for anyone to control, and after she returns to Discovery, she has the portal placed beyond the event horizon of one of the black holes, where no one will ever be able to reach it again. Then we get Saru and Tarina's wedding! And Burnham and Book steal away for a private moment on the beach, where they confirm that they still love each other and recommit to being together. Then Burnham receives a hail from Kovich, another mission probably, and Burnham and Book leave to discover what the future holds. I like that. The road getting there was pretty bumpy, but what a lovely way to end the... Oh, wait, that's not the end. Okay, so we jump ahead a few decades. Burnham and Book are older, still together, living on some alien world. They seem happy, content. Their son arrives. He's in Starfleet, freshly promoted to captain, about to assume his first command. Burnham, now an admiral, leaves with him. So Burnham and Book's son, becoming captain, and Admiral Burnham seeing him off. What a lovely way to end That's still not the end? Okay. Burnham goes back aboard Discovery, which has been restored to its original 23rd century configuration, and informs Zora, the ship's AI computer, that Discovery has one last mission: to fly to a set of coordinates in deep space and wait for a guy named Kraft to show up. Zora's like, okay. And Discovery flies out of space dock, and Spore jumps away, and that's the end. All right. The final episode is 80 minutes long. It could easily have been 60 or less, even with the epilogue, which I imagine accounts for most of the additional material they shot after learning that this would be the final season. So much of this episode feels like padding and treading water. Burnham and Maul have a long, pointless fight and jump through multiple unnecessary hoops before finally reaching the Progenitor's technology when they could easily have just started there. When they arrive through the portal, the preliminaries accomplish nothing other than killing time. Same deal with Discovery's battle against the Breen ship. Discovery destroys a fleet of small Breen attack fighters by igniting a nearby plasma cloud, which is the sort of move we've seen Star Trek heroes do more times than I can count, and is still presented as this innovative and risky maneuver. It's not. It feels rote and uncreative, like the writers of the show just wanted to give Rayner and the rest of the crew still on the ship something to do, and couldn't think of anything better. Okay, that's not fair. The writers did think of something better for Rayner and the crew to do, the way they end up defeating the Breen by finding a way to project the effect of Discovery's spore drive outward and jump the Breen ship to a far-off point in space is very clever, and I liked it a lot. It shows the crew working together to solve a problem against long odds. It features arguably the signature piece of technology for this series, the spore drive, being used in a way that makes sense, but which we've never seen before. It allows the crew, and specifically Rayner, to defeat the Breen while also showing them mercy, sending them away without killing them. It's a terrific development. But to get there, we have to sit through the rehashed ignite the plasma bit. Saru's wedding is lovely. Burnham and Book's scene on the beach is lovely. Burnham and Book decades in the future is lovely. I wish they'd just stop there. The episode rolls past multiple good endings just so it can conclude on a graceless and perfunctory attempt to line up the end of the series with the Calypso short trek from 2018. I don't want to say I hated it, because that's far too strong, but I did not like it. And that's nothing against Calypso. I love Calypso. I think Calypso is one of the best things yet produced by Star Trek's current creative regime. It's sweet, it's sad, it's earnest, it's beautiful. It's better than any episode of Discovery, and all but maybe 2 episodes of any of the other current shows. I adore it. But did we need to end Discovery with a tacked-on scene that wrenches the series into alignment with Calypso? No, we did not. The circumstances that led to Discovery being in the situation it's in during Calypso are vague and mysterious. Something happened to the crew. The ship was abandoned here for some reason. It was a long time ago. So long that Zora doesn't even really remember. The specifics don't matter and shouldn't have mattered to the creators of Discovery. But if they did matter, if the creators did care so much about ending Discovery in a way that pointed toward Calypso, they should have come up with something better than, oh, Starfleet ordered Discovery to go there and wait for craft for some reason. And if they didn't have time to do anything other than that because they found out about this being the series finale when the episode was almost done, they should have just done nothing with regard to Calypso and ended Discovery the way the show and its characters demanded and deserved. Saru's wedding? Okay. Burnham and Book on the beach? Okay. Burnham and Book and Sun? Okay. Any of those would have been just fine. The inelegant and unnecessary Calypso ending is an example of a larger problem with the episode. Too often things just sort of happen because they happen. Events which are important to moving the plot forward happen and go a certain direction, not because of a character making a meaningful decision that we in the audience can understand, but just because Burnham and Maul are on the other side of the portal, and Burnham realizes that what they're seeing won't lead them to the progenitor's technology, that what they're seeking is beyond what they're seeing, behind it, in the negative space. And then like 10 seconds later, she notices a weird shadow and immediately finds what they're looking for. No sense of accomplishment, no train of thought that we can follow so the revelation feels like it has some meaning or significance. Just a thing that happens when it needs to happen for the plot. Same thing with the Calypso ending. Why is Discovery leaving on this final mission? Why is it going to this point in space and being told to just wait? Why has it been restored to its 23rd century form? Because it needs to do that for Calypso to happen. Does it mean anything in the context of this episode or this series? No. It really doesn't even mean anything in the context of Calypso, because it's unnecessary. It's just there. The episode has some very nice moments, particularly between Burnham and Book, and Burnham and Saru, and in the epilogue up until the Calypso seeming takes over at the very end. But I think this show, for all its flaws and failings, deserved better. I think these characters and these actors deserved better. What they got was a finale that is a reflection of the series as a whole, unfortunately. That holds true not just for the final episode, but for the entire final season. Despite the whiplash-inducing creative ups and downs that plagued it throughout its run, I can't help but feel that Discovery should have gotten a better swan song than this. I'm not saying they should take another crack at it. God knows I've had my fill of Star Trek refusing to leave well enough alone when it comes to endings. I didn't love it, but it's done, and it is what it is. Let it rest. But yeah, I wish it had been better. In 5 years, the writers of Discovery never figured out how to effectively tell a season-long story. They came closer in Season 2 than they ever did again, and Season 4 had an excellent first half before creatively dropping off a cliff, but none of Discovery's 5 seasons can be said to have a story that is well-paced, that is compelling from start to finish, and has a truly satisfying and well-earned conclusion. In that sense, Season 5 may even be the worst of all. Earlier seasons all have moments where they run off the rails, but I'm not sure Season 5 is ever on the rails to begin with. The big story this year, the search for the progenitor's technology, is more or less dead on arrival. It's based on an Easter egg from TNG. It's a dull, repetitive treasure hunt plot. It refers to supposedly high stakes that never feel real. It involves weak, unconvincing villains who I never for a second regard as an actual threat. And worst of all, it's vague, vague, vague. We've got to find the progenitor's tech. It's the most important thing in the history of the universe. Is it? People keep saying that. but it never feels that way. It's randomly introduced at the start of the season. The Romulan science vessel just sort of turns up. Again, things happen because they happen, not because of anything meaningful or dramatically satisfying. What does the progenitor's tech do? Why might it be dangerous? What are our heroes planning to do with it if they find it? Dunno. It's super important, though. It's hard to get emotionally invested in something when I have no idea what it is beyond a powerful technology that has something to do with a not that important TNG episode. Likewise, it's hard to get involved in the journey of the characters when so much of that journey consists of Captain Burnham turning up at that episode's location and politely announcing to the people there, "We're here for the clue." Are these adults in a desperate race against time and their enemies, hunting for technology that may hold the key to the origins of life itself, or are they Cub Scouts on a scavenger hunt? The season does a little better with some of its character arcs. After his experience in Janal, Dr. Culber begins experiencing a bit of an existential crisis. He starts to think about things in spiritual terms for the first time and wonders what the discovery of the progenitor's technology will mean for everyone and for him as an individual. It leads to some interesting conversations between Culber and Stamets, his husband, and Tilly and Book. And ultimately, it leads to Culber somehow knowing the proper frequency needed to lock onto the progenitor's portal with a tractor beam in the final episode. He attributes this to a memory from Janal, but he can't explain how he has that memory, or why, or how he knew he was supposed to go with Book on the mission to capture the portal and rescue Burnham. He realizes that he doesn't need to know, that not everything needs a concrete, nailed-down, literal explanation, that sometimes there's beauty in the mystery. Good point, Hugh. There's also solid character writing this season for Adira, whose story is about gaining confidence and learning to stand on their own, Tilly, who continues to grow into her role as a mentor, and Raynor, who remains the no-nonsense hard-ass, but also forms a closeness with Burnham and Tilly and earns the trust of the Discovery crew. And, as always, Burnham and Saru are great together. We don't get much of them together, sadly, but what we get is a highlight. I've said before, the best way to get me to love a show is to convince me that the characters actually care about each other, more so than any other pair on the series. I believe Burnham and Saru care about each other. Their friendship, their bond feels real and carries the show even when it seems like there's nothing else. Speaking of which, the reason why there's not much Saru and Burnham stuff this season is because there's not much Saru this season. He gets his final mission with Burnham early on, and he gets his wedding in the finale, as well as a scene where he conducts a tough negotiation with another Breen leader that gives him a nice moment of triumph, but he's essentially absent for about 2/3 of the season. I know this was because Doug Jones had other commitments and couldn't be helped, but it still sucks. And Saru isn't the only familiar face we don't see much of this year. After episode 4, Detmer and Woshikun, the characters regularly seen operating the forward stations on the bridge, the Sulu and Chekhov of Discovery, if you will, disappear and aren't seen again, until popping up very briefly at the very end of the finale. Did Emily Coots and Oyen Oladejo both have other commitments too? If so, good for them, but it feels both odd and, given their poor characterization over the years, oddly appropriate to have two pretty visible recurring characters just vanish for most of the final season. What else? Oh, I teased at the beginning about whether or not this final season of Discovery was at least better than Star Trek Picard. Yeah, it is. That's not a high bar, and Disco Season 5 does not clear it easily, but it does ultimately clear it. Disco Season 5 doesn't have any episodes as good as Picard Season 3's 4th episode, the excellent no-win scenario, but it also doesn't have any episodes anywhere close to as awful as Picard Season 3's first and last episodes, or the entirety of Picard Season 2. Disco Season 5 does contain many of the same problems that the Picard series did, just in much lower and therefore more tolerable amounts. For example, the Picard series, particularly in its final season, was just a shameless parade of meaningless pandering fan service. Discovery's final season has that problem too, but it doesn't come out as often. The MacGuffin is a TNG Easter egg, which gets things off to a bad start, but winds up being overshadowed by more serious issues. The fan service only really goes into overdrive for one scene in the final episode, when Burnham meets with Kovich for the last time. Not only are we shown a shelf behind Kovich's desk, which contains several random Easter eggs from past Trek shows, a bottle of Chateau Picard wine, Geordi's visor, and a baseball, presumably the one from Captain Sisko's desk on Deep Space Nine. We're also told that, hey, surprise, surprise, Kovich isn't really his name. His real name is Daniels. He's the time agent from Star Trek Enterprise. Isn't that... I don't like it. Why can't Kovich just be Kovich? Is he more interesting now that he's been revealed to be a character from another series? Hey, remember what Culber said about how sometimes the mystery is better than knowing the literal truth? This is another one of those times. Part of what makes Kovich a compelling character, to the extent that he is one, is the mystery. Who is this guy? How does he know the things he knows? Just because it's the last episode, that doesn't mean you have to tell us. And if you do decide to tell us, you can just make up something new instead of saying, oh, by the way, he's actually this other guy from this other series that, apart from taking place in the same fictional universe 1,000 years in these characters' past, has nothing to do with this show. Why does Kovich have a shelf of TNG and DS9 Easter eggs in his office? Do we have any reason to assume these objects mean anything to him or to Burnham? No. Shit, if Kovich is really Daniel, shouldn't he have at least one memento from Archer's Enterprise up there? I don't know, a phase pistol? The taxidermied carcass of Porthos? Maybe there is something from Enterprise on that shelf, but if there is, we don't get a close-up of it, do we? We get a close-up of the TNG and DS9 stuff. Why are they in the scene? So we will go, oh, I know what that is. I know what that is. I remember that from that other series. Putting things in your show that have nothing to do with your show solely to spark nostalgic recognition in some members of the audience is shitty writing. I just really don't like it. But looking on the bright side, at least it's one scene, not 10 episodes. It could have been worse. Maybe that's the best note to end on. Like I said, I'm going to do another video about Discovery as a whole, looking at the entire series, but in terms of Season 5, I didn't like a lot of it. I found it disappointing. It could have been worse, though. As has always been the case with Discovery, it looked great. The set design and costumes are fabulous. The episodes are well directed. The action sequences are mostly excellent. I could have done without the gratuitous time-wasting fight between Burnham and Maul in the finale, but that's the exception, not the rule. The acting is terrific. Michael Burnham may be a remote, unknowable character, but Sonequa Martin Green plays the shit out of her, and put her in a scene with Saru, and buddy, I'm doing all right. Saru, Tilly, Stamets, Culber, Jet Reno, Book, Adira, Rayner. These are characters from Disco that I came to care about, that I feel as though I've gotten to know to one degree or another. They're probably not the only ones, but they're the ones who come most easily to mind. They're the ones I wish had gotten a better final season and final episode. They're the ones I'll remember when I think of Discovery, the ones I'll most look forward to revisiting when I watch it again in years to come. They're the ones I'll miss.